Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story takes us deep into one of the most intense and heartbreaking chapters of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. The moment when Ukraine's last stand in Pokrovsk collapsed, leaving soldiers trapped, surrounded, and ultimately captured in what many analysts are calling one of the most strategically devastating situations for Kiev on the Eastern Front. As we break down what really happened, why the battlefield shifted so drastically, and what this means for the wider war, it becomes clear that Pokrovsk wasn't just another frontline city. It was a pressure point, a gateway, and ultimately the place where hundreds of Ukrainian troops found themselves caught in a massive encirclement that unfolded faster than anyone predicted. Pokrovsk had been under pressure for months, but the real escalation began when Russian forces launched a series of coordinated strikes targeting Ukrainian supply routes, fuel lines, and communication networks. These weren't random attacks. They were part of a larger strategy designed to slowly choke Ukrainian defenders, limit reinforcement options, and force them into smaller and smaller pockets. Ukrainian commanders expected pressure, but not at the scale or intensity that unfolded in the final 72 hours before the collapse. As shells hammered positions day and night, Ukrainian units found themselves cut off from the main road leading west, the last route they depended on for evacuation and resupply. Within hours, multiple Ukrainian brigades inside Pokrovsk realized they were being pushed into what soldiers described as a tightening iron ring. Drones circled above constantly, identifying defensive trenches and small groups of soldiers trying to reposition. Every attempt to move resulted in new barrages. Ukraine tried to break the encirclement with rapid counterattacks from the north and southwest, but each attempt failed because Russian forces had already fortified the surrounding villages. Slowly, the defenders' circle shrank, and with it, any hope of a breakthrough began to fade. By the second day of the encirclement, the battlefield situation took a dramatic turn. Ammunition reports began showing critical shortages. Some units were down to their last magazines. Others had no anti-armor weapons left. Medical teams couldn't reach the wounded because the routes they used earlier had been cratered by artillery. Drone footage released later showed small groups of Ukrainian troops attempting to carry the injured across open fields, only to be targeted by precision strikes. The psychological pressure on the soldiers inside the pocket was enormous. They were dealing with non-stop bombardment, dwindling supplies, and failing communication lines that made coordination nearly impossible. At the same time, Russian forces intensified pressure by advancing block by block toward the central defensive line, using drones, armored vehicles, and infantry working in synchronized groups. They slowly eroded Ukrainian defenses. Buildings that soldiers had been using as cover were destroyed one after another. Trenches that were dug weeks earlier were flattened. Many defenders believed reinforcements would eventually arrive, but as hours passed, it became clear that Ukraine did not have the capability to break through the Russian ring fast enough to save the units trapped inside. By the third day, the situation officially shifted into what military analysts call a cauldron. This term refers to a complete encirclement where the defenders have no safe exit, no supply routes, and no ability to retreat without taking catastrophic losses. For the Ukrainian troops in Pokrovsk, this was the moment reality set in. Commanders still urged soldiers to hold their positions, while Kiev attempted to coordinate an aerial corridor for evacuation. But drones ensured nothing moved without being spotted. Even nighttime brought no relief, as thermal systems caught anything moving in the dark. Inside the pocket, Ukrainian troops described the final hours as chaotic and overwhelming. Some units tried to regroup. Others dug new positions deeper underground. A few attempted small breakout attempts in groups of 10 to 15 people, but most were cut down before they could advance more than 100 meters. Communications with headquarters were fading, and some frontline fighters reported that radios were picking up interference, leaving them confused, isolated, and unsure of the next orders. Many soldiers were exhausted after days without rest, living on limited water, and sharing whatever ammunition remained among themselves. As Russian units closed in from all sides, the battlefield became a maze of shattered buildings, burning vehicles, and collapsed trenches. Ukrainian soldiers, realizing they were running out of food and ammunition, faced a critical dilemma: continue fighting until the last round or attempt to negotiate surrender to save the wounded. Analysts later revealed that the majority of the forces trapped inside had no heavy weapons left, making continued resistance almost impossible. Once the last eastern defensive line fell, the encirclement became complete, and the remaining soldiers had nowhere left to retreat. The moment of surrender inside the Pokrovsk trap was not a single event, but a series of simultaneous collapses. Various groups across the pocket laid down their arms after being overrun, while others surrendered when drone loudspeakers instructed them to do so. Some Ukrainian troops managed to surrender while carrying their wounded comrades, hoping to get them medical attention. Russian drone footage released afterward showed long lines of Ukrainian soldiers walking with their hands raised, many visibly exhausted, covered in dust, and barely able to stand after days of heavy combat. For Ukraine, the fall of Pokrovsk and the mass capture of soldiers was a devastating blow. Not only did it result in the loss of hundreds of trained fighters, but it also created a major gap in the defensive line that Kiev had spent months reinforcing. Military analysts warned that losing Pokrovsk could trigger further Russian advances deeper into the Donetsk region. For the soldiers' families back home, the news was heartbreaking. Many waited desperately for confirmation that their loved ones were either safe, alive, or among those captured. On the Russian side, the successful encirclement was celebrated as a major tactical victory. Russian military channels showcased drone footage, interviews, and battlefield analysis, explaining how the encirclement was executed with precision. They described it as a demonstration of improved coordination between artillery, infantry, and drone units. The Kremlin used the event to highlight their claim that the momentum had shifted in their favor, and that Ukraine was struggling to recruit and train enough troops to sustain the front. Internationally, the fall of Pokrovsk sparked discussions about the future of the war. NATO officials expressed concern over the ability of Ukraine to hold key cities under such intense pressure. Many analysts pointed out that this encirclement could signal a new phase of high-intensity operations, where Russia aims to destroy Ukrainian brigades rather than simply capturing territory. Humanitarian organizations urged both sides to respect the rights of prisoners of war and allow access to those captured during the battle. As the world absorbed the news, one question began circulating widely. Could this have been prevented? Many experts argue that Pokrovsk had been vulnerable for months due to geography, supply challenges, and gaps in Ukraine's rotation system. Others insisted that Ukraine simply did not have enough manpower or artillery ammunition to hold back the overwhelming assault. Regardless of the cause, The result was undeniable. A significant number of Ukrainian soldiers were trapped in a deadly pocket with no way out. In the days following the collapse, Ukrainian officials promised to negotiate for the return of captured troops. Once more prisoner exchange channels opened. Families of those captured began gathering in cities across Ukraine, holding signs, photos, and candles, hoping their loved ones would be included in future exchanges. Social media filled with emotional messages, prayers, and heartbreaking videos of soldiers sending what could have been their final messages before surrendering. Pokrovsk will now be remembered as one of the most intense and tragic battles of this phase of the war. It highlights the harsh reality of modern combat, the importance of logistics, and the devastating consequences of encirclement warfare. For Ukraine, recovering from this loss will require time, reinforcements, and new strategies. For Russia, the victory strengthens their position on the Eastern Front and boosts their morale. And for the world watching, it is a stark reminder that this conflict remains far from over. As we continue to follow the developments, the human cost remains at the heart of this story. Soldiers on both sides are fighting in extreme conditions, facing dangers that most people cannot imagine. The Pokrovsk trap, with its mass surrender, will shape upcoming military and political decisions, and it may become a turning point in the wider war. Everyone is now waiting to see whether Ukraine can stabilize the front or whether more cities may fall under similar circumstances. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned as more updates unfold from this rapidly changing conflict.